Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land, we're here for you. I'm Ladar Gavelazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance arrived in Israel today at the start of high-level talks aimed at salvaging the fragile ceasefire with Hamas and pushing forward President Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan.
Vice President Vance arrived in Israel at the start of a three-day visit with the enforcement of the Gaza ceasefire and advancing the Trump plan, topping his agenda. The visit follows Monday's meeting between Netanyahu, Trump envoy Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner as the U.S. pushes Israel and Egypt to keep the ceasefire on track after several violations by Hamas. Ahead of the visit, the Hostages and Missing Families Forum sent a letter to the U.S. administration thanking them for their efforts, but urging continued pressure until, quote, every body and every soul is brought home. Vance is due to meet Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Defense Minister Israel Katz, and President Isaac Herzog, with discussions expected to focus on the return of hostage bodies that are still held in Gaza and the security arrangements for the next stage of the agreement. Prime Minister Netanyahu told the Knesset that he will discuss security challenges and political opportunities with the visiting vice president.
ואנחנו נשוחח על שני דברים, בעיקר שני דברים, על האתגרים הביטחוניים שעומדים בפנינו וההזדמנויות המדיניות שעומדות בפנינו. נגבר על האתגרים, נממש את ההזדמנויות. בזכות עוצמתנו ובשיתוף פעולה חוזר עם נשיא ארצות הברית, אני מאמין שנביא עוד הסכמי שלום עם מדינות במרחב.
Ahead of the Vance visit, U.S. President Donald Trump sent another warning to Hamas to adhere to the ceasefire and stop the violence.
In addition, you have Israel would go in 2 minutes if I asked him to go in. I could tell him, go in and take care of it. But right now, we haven't said that. We're going to give it a little chance, and hopefully there will be a little less violence. But right now, you know, they're violent people. Hamas has been very violent. But they don't have the backing of Iran anymore. They don't have the backing of really anybody anymore. They have to be good. And if they're not good, they'll be eradicated.
And moving on, across Israel, scenes of hope and relief continue. After more than 2 years in captivity, several freed hostages have now been discharged from hospitals and reunited with their families. For more on these emotional homecomings and what comes next, we go to India Naftali in Tel Aviv. India, what's the latest?
That's right. We are witnessing incredible displays of celebration and relief as the freed living hostages return home after more than 2 years in Hamas captivity. Among them are Omri Miran, Matan Zangaker, and Matan Angrest, who were discharged from Tel Aviv's Ichilov Medical Center 4 days after their release. Their families are now taking their first steps to rebuild their lives. Crowds lined the streets as the three men arrived home, greeted by flags, cheers, and banners. Hospital officials say they're in stable condition, but face a long road to physical and emotional recovery. This is what former hostage Omri Miran had to say.
ועכשיו זה באמת הזמן לחזור לחיים, להמשיך בחיים ולחזור למשפחה.
In the central city of Kfar Saba, crowds gathered to celebrate the return of Eitan Horn. He was photographed with his brother Yair, who was also kidnapped but released during a ceasefire at the beginning of the war. Eitan told the crowd this.
אני בסדר גמור, בבטח תמיד האמנתי שאני אגיע הביתה, והרגע זה הגיע בזכות כל עם ישראל.
Neighbors described it as a very emotional day, saying they waited years to see this moment. Former hostage Nimrod Cohen also received the homecoming of a hero, although he said he was not expecting it. And finally, in another emotional reunion, former hostage Emily Damari, who was freed in January, met newly released twin brothers Gali and Ziv Berman at Sheba Medical Center. She was close friends with them before they were all kidnapped on October 7th. But as Israel celebrates their homecomings, officials stress that the return of the fallen hostages is no less important than the living. Some of the hostages' bodies have been returned to Israel, but many still remain in Gaza, which is in violation of the ceasefire terms. Back to you.
Thank you, India, for the report.
Well, as the fragile ceasefire continues to hold, albeit with caveats, here with us to analyze the situation is Ron Campius, the former bureau chief at the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. Ron, thanks so much for joining us today. I'd like to start by asking you your thoughts on the Trump administration's approach so far. We see now VP Vance here in Israel, strong statements from the White House, but certainly not giving Israel, the freedom to do whatever it wants when it comes to responding to Hamas violations, at least thus far. What's the end game here?
I think the Trump administration is just very eager to preserve this ceasefire. We're very eager to sustain it. They are clear-eyed about Hamas and how inherently unreliable it is as a partner, but it's obviously right now in this very moment, it's the only partner there is to sustain it. But they are also, as you can see from interviews with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner on 60 Minutes recently, they are not, they trust the Israeli government, but they're also wary of Benjamin Netanyahu and the pressures he's facing from the right, and they don't want it to, the exchanges of fire that we've had over the last few days, they definitely don't want that to escalate.
Certainly. Now, Hamas has returned, as of now, all but 13 hostage bodies so far. Do you believe that this terror group actually knows where more of these bodies are, as the Prime Minister's office has alleged? Or are they telling the truth when they say that they may not be able to recover some of these bodies?
I think that's very hard to say. Hamas, on the one hand, is completely in control of the areas that it controls. It's a totalitarian entity, and you saw the alacrity with which they found so-called collaborators with Israel and executed them and punished them. So they know where people are. They know where things are hidden. They're very good at that. On the other hand, during the 2 years that the hostages have been held, you have heard stories about how, first of all, on October the 7th. It wasn't just Hamas that came away with hostages. It was the other groups. It was also even civilians. And then you heard stories about people who were holding hostages who were killed. Perhaps the hostages were killed. Perhaps they'd already killed the hostages. And so where they would have put the bodies might have died with them. And so that's a very difficult open question. And again, it comes back to the fact that Hamas is inherently unreliable. And, the circumstances are plausible that they might not know where the bodies are, but they also, they might just be lying.
Well, Hamas is facing a lot of pressure over many things, but, most recently their executions of Palestinians in Gaza. But they are determined, as we've heard from their leadership just this week, to have a role in post-war Gaza governance and, of course, not to demilitarize. What can we expect to see from phase 2, or will we even get there?
I think it's a big question as to whether we get there. I mean, the triumph of President Trump, and of his son-in-law Jared Kushner and of his envoy Steve Witkoff is simply getting to a really productive stage 1 in which the 20 living hostages were released and the gunfire has subsided, if not completely quieted. But the intractable elements that have frustrated stage 2s in the past remain. Hamas wants to stay. Hamas does not want to disarm. Israel wants Hamas out. Israel wants Hamas disarmed. To the degree that they've compromised, it's basically only that I think Israel has agreed to the stipulation that Hamas leaders can leave and live out their lives quietly somewhere else, but not in the Gaza Strip, and that still remains a big obstacle. And it's one, I think, that's frustrating the Trump administration because Donald Trump really wants to get to a lasting peace here.
Now, in terms of security, I want to ask you, how risky is this international force that the U.S. Would like to see in Gaza? I mean, we're not talking about only friends of Israel. We're talking about some representation from the Turkish military, as well as others that will be involved on the ground. Is this something that you think Israel can or should accept in terms of security? And if not, I mean, is there even any alternative?
That's a big question. I think that Israel has always been wary of any other country, even the United States, securing its borders. It's always had its why there have been where it's talk in the past in the United States by the most pro-Israel politicians, including the late John McCain, about bringing Israel into some kind of alliance, bringing Israel into NATO, and the resistance has come from Israel because, for very good historical reasons having to do with Jewish history, Israel does not want to second its security out to any other source, and certainly you have the risk of there's a bigger risk in a way with close friends policing Hamas, because what if or policing the Gaza Strip, because what if there's a conflict between Israeli troops and the administrative troops of an ally? But yes, obviously Turkey is also a problem because of Erdogan and his expressed hostility to Israel and his alliance with Hamas. Although if you look at the internal politics of Turkey, the military is not necessarily aligned with Erdogan, at least in terms of his hostility towards Israel. And there is a rich tradition before Erdogan, and even stretching into his decades-long administration, of an alliance between Turkey and Israel. So all those factors, I think, would make the Israelis very wary of foreign presence in the Gaza Strip.
All right, well, we'll have to follow that closely as it develops and discussions continue for phase 2. Unfortunately, we're out of time today, but I want to thank you, Ron Campius, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, turning to the northern front, where IDF troops from the Mountains Brigade demolished several Hezbollah outposts on the Lebanese side of Mount Dov. The operation was carried out by the IDF Mountain Brigade, which celebrated its first anniversary with another successful result. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
In the nighttime operation, IDF troops from the Mountain Brigade operated beyond the border, demolishing several Hezbollah posts on the Lebanese side of Mount Dov. The operation was carried out by reservists and combat engineers of the 810th Mountains Regional Brigade. The IDF said that the posts were destroyed to prevent them from being used by Hezbollah to entrench itself in the area in the future. The move marks a continued effort by Israel to disrupt Hezbollah's infrastructure along the northern border amid rising tensions in the region. The IDF released new footage of the Mountain Brigade marking 1 year since its formation. The brigade is deployed along Israel's northern front, defending the strategic area from Lebanon's Mount Dov to Syria's Hermon summit. Over the past year, troops of the 810th Mountain Brigade carried out dozens of operations across both fronts. During Operation Northern Arrows, forces dismantled Hezbollah terror infrastructure in the Mount Dov region, uncovering underground tunnel routes and seizing large quantities of weapons. In Operation Bashan Arrows, conducted in the Syrian Hermon summit area, the brigade led the IDF's advance into the region and has maintained ongoing defensive and operational activity there ever since. The IDF said the Mountain Brigade continues to operate on both fronts, targeting terrorist infrastructure that threatens Israeli communities and working to ensure the security of civilians in the north.
And joining me now to discuss these current events is retired Colonel Miri Eisen of the International Institution for Counterterrorism at Reichman University. Thank you, Miri, for joining.
Thank you so much, Sivan. Always a pleasure to be here.
Likewise. Let's begin with this fragile ceasefire, or hudna, as someone I interviewed called it. Is it likely, in your opinion, to hold, and what will it take to break it?
It's sustainable, and the sustainability is because both sides are interested in it staying. When I say staying, this is going to be slightly the way that Vice President Vance said. There will constantly be Hamas terrorists. I'm not going to call them militants, and I'm not going to call them fighters. Hamas terrorists of the cells, both of the ones that are with and uphold what Hamas is doing, and those who are against what Hamas is doing. They're going to try to push the Israeli limits so that we're going to constantly be seeing these clashes. But that's not going to stop the overall ceasefire, because there's a strong interest, not just of Israel, but especially both of Hamas and of all of the other players that were mentioned before. Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, the United States, all of them are on board. So it's sustainable, but it's constantly going to be challenged.
Now, the U.S. says that the ceasefire is on, that nothing has changed. Vice President Vance even stressed how complicated the situation is on the ground. But yesterday was a bloody day, and we saw IDF soldiers unfortunately killed and some wounded. How is Israel to protect itself? And also, how should they respond in any case of future violations, in your opinion?
Sivan, I kind of feel like saying to all of us right now, breathe in deep. The war is not over. We're in a ceasefire. This is not about peace. This is not about reconciliation. This isn't in that sense, that kind of thing. We're still in the Gaza Strip. We're making sure still with our IDF forces, that's why they are there, both to protect us as the citizens inside Israel itself, to try as much as possible to make life better for all of us in the Middle East. But that friction which comes from Hamas needs to be responded. Hamas is trying out what are the parameters, how much can they do without being in that sense censured. And here I'm going to say, so we're protecting ourselves and our soldiers are there to protect us. While we're in the Gaza Strip, there is always going to be that danger. And I have to be, again, breathing in deep. The danger will continue after. Hamas has not disappeared. And I'm going to say, sadly, it's not that the 2 million people in the Gaza Strip love us tomorrow morning. So we're going to have our challenges cut out, but we are defending ourselves, and that's what we're there for, to defend all of the Israelis, the citizens, non-Israelis, the people who need to be defended.
Now, Hamas, like you said, has not disappeared. It's certainly still in power. We saw Palestinian executions on Gaza streets and them reinstating themselves. And the U.S. made a pact here with Qatar and with other Arab states to ensure the continuation of their plan. Do you think it's possible, or might be a possibility, that Hamas will inevitably be allowed to stay in power?
I don't think they'll be allowed to stay in power. But I absolutely am going to state that they are going to be in the Gaza Strip. They are going to be what I'm going to call a power in the Gaza Strip, because they're not just and only a terror army. They're more than that. And I say it sadly, that ideology that they bring out, the ideology that calls for the annihilation of Israel, amongst other things, is very strong throughout the Gaza Strip, and that's not going to go away. The question is who is going to rule, and I'll phrase it in a different way. To me, the big question is, will Hamas continue to openly bear arms? I am sure that they will try to continue to bear arms clandestinely, hiding it. But I do want to hope that there's going to be somebody else who's going to be the official authority, and that Hamas will not bear open arms and not have open arms and not be able to do so openly, that somebody else will be in charge.
Now, how do you think Hamas can be removed? Does Qatar have an incentive to remove them? Could it be that it's within their best interest to keep them there?
Qatar are not in the Gaza Strip. Qatar would send what we can call money into the Gaza Strip, but they're not physically there. Yeah. The ones that really impact what happens inside the Gaza Strip are only really two parties. Israel, that borders the Gaza Strip, and for all of those around us who forget it all the time, Egypt, that borders the Gaza Strip. You can't get in or out of the Gaza Strip without going through Egypt and Israel. And I would say that those are the two main powers, more than Qatar. Qatar is talking and certainly giving money and doing all sorts of different things. But in actually having an impact on the ground, it has to go through Israel and Egypt. And those are going to be the two main players that are going to impact if and how. And again, I was very careful in what I said. I think it's very hard to disarm Hamas, but I think it is possible to establish a different force that is the authority, and to at least make it very clear that Hamas is a terror army, and if they hold arms, it's not allowed. But I don't see somebody actually going and taking the arms away from them.
Right. Mary Eisen, thank you very much for this input.
Thank you so much.
And U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner revealed new details regarding the hostage for ceasefire negotiations in a joint interview with CBS's 60 Minutes. In an exclusive peek at the full interview, Witkoff revealed tension and disagreement between Israel and the U.S. following Israel's attempt to eliminate Hamas officials in Doha, Qatar with precision strikes. Witkoff even added that he and Kushner felt betrayed, as no one in the White House knew the strikes were coming.
We woke up the next morning to find out that there had been this attack. And of course, I was called by the president.
You had no idea, obviously.
None whatsoever. You know, I think both Jared and I felt, I just feel we felt a little bit betrayed.
Now, I had heard that the president, that he was furious.
I think he felt like the Israelis were getting a little bit out of control in what they were doing, and that it was time to be very strong and stop them from doing things that he felt were not in their long-term interests.
Witkoff added that striking the Qataris had impacted the negotiation process.
And by the way, Leslie, it had a metastasizing effect because the Qataris were critical to the negotiation, as were the Egyptians and the Turks. And we had lost the confidence of the Qataris. Right. And so Hamas went underground, and it was very, very difficult to get to them. And
they were your link to Hamas.
Absolutely.
You were dealing through the Qataris to make your proposals to Hamas.
And it became very, very evident as to how important and how critical that role was.
The full interview is set to air tonight, and Witkoff and Kushner are expected to reveal more behind-the-scenes information from the Gaza ceasefire deal negotiations.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is facing global outrage after saying he would order the arrest of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu if he enters Canada, a move that many call political theater and a national disgrace. Let's take a look.
After his Palestinian state recognition, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has declared Canada would uphold the highly politicized International Criminal Court warrant against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The comment triggered an immediate diplomatic crisis and accusations that Carney is again caving to extremist pressure.
Justin Trudeau said that Canada would honour the International Criminal Court arrest warrants, i.e. Benjamin Netanyahu would be arrested if he came to Canada. Does that stand under your leadership?
Yes.
You'd be prepared to do that?
The ICC warrant itself has been condemned by the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany as a dangerous overstep that politicizes international justice. The Trump administration went even further, imposing sanctions on ICC officials in response to what it called an outrageous attack on a democratic ally defending itself from terror. Legal experts have branded the ICC's action an exercise in political theater that sets a shameful precedent of criminalizing democracies fighting for their very survival. In Jerusalem, the Prime Minister's office called Carney's statement an unprecedented insult from a former friend, urging him to reverse course. Officials warn that Canada's position undermines its credibility on the world stage and emboldens those who seek to destroy the Jewish state. In Canada, the impact is equally troubling. Anti-Semitic incidents in Canada rose by more than 100% in the past year, the highest levels ever recorded. B'nai B'rith and the Simon Wiesenthal Center both warn that government rhetoric like Carney's is feeding a wave of hate and normalizing extremism across the country. From Toronto to Montreal, synagogues have been vandalized and Jewish students threatened on campus. Critics say Carney's embrace of pro-terror policies, from his naive decision to recognize Palestine to this promise to arrest Israel's elected leader, signals a dangerous turn for Canada itself.
For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's weekly review. See you next week.